Hello everyone, it is Katie here from the Queen of Teen Fiction. As you may have noticed, my bookshelf has a few gaps amongst the books. That is because I have taken a few books down so that I can do my top 10 books of the year. So we are fast approaching the end of 2015. Can you believe this year is over already? Where is my life going? But whilst I am sad to see the year go by, there have been some fantastic books out this year. I think 2015 for me has been a really good reading year. There have been a lot of books that I have really enjoyed. In fact, there haven't been that many that I've disliked this year, which doesn't happen very often. So I have been really happy with the books that I've read this year. But anyway, let's start this attempt at a countdown. Coming in at number 10 is Ren, the Man Behind the Monster by the fabulous Sarah Noff. Ren is a character that appears in all of Sarah's previous books. I've been waiting so long to finally find out more of his story, and Sarah finally published this book just about Ren and his life. So I was really excited to read it and it didn't disappoint, and so that's why it has made my list of top 10 favourite books this year. I just got the paperback, so I'm really excited to see it in its finished glory, and it's signed by Sarah as well, and the message is really sweet. Ren makes me emotional. So I've really loved all of Sarah's books this year basically, but this has been my favourite. And also I have to point out that Sarah is a self-published author. Her stories are fantastic and she has done so brilliantly with self-publishing her works, and she is definitely one of the reasons why you shouldn't ignore self-published authors. Okay, so number 9. Number 9 has been a bit of an issue for me because I couldn't choose between two books. So I am going to cheat a little and include both of them, and they are The Blackthorn Key by Kevin Sons and The Rhythmist by Brandon Sanderson. They are very much similar genres, both fantasy books, and the characters are around the same age. I just could not choose between the two of them, so I have included both of them. Don't look at me like that, it is my channel, I can do what I want. I'm the boss. So at first I was just going to include The Rhythmist by itself, but this book technically wasn't first published in 2015, so I didn't know whether I was cheating a little bit by putting this on the list. I think it came out first in 2013, but this version of the book was published this year, and that was the one I was sent to read, so this one was published this year. So technically I can include it. But The Rhythmist is set in a magically wonderful school, in a magically wonderful world. The characters are fantastic, and this book is about chalk. And it sounds kind of silly when you say it, but it's just amazing. It's definitely been one of my favourite fantasy reads this year. And The Blackthorn Key was published this year. It was a debut novel by the author, Kevin Sons, and it's set in the 1600s in London, and it's about potions and alchemy and a young apprentice boy that ends up in way over his head. I was very lucky to receive an ARC of this book, and I just loved it from the first chapter. I find the protagonists in both of these books to be quite similar, even though they're set in completely different worlds. And what I also loved about both of these books is they're kind of crossovers between children's and young adult books. So they're in that kind of middle grade area that can be read by anyone. And what I also loved about both of them is that romance wasn't a focus point. It was more about two boys going on amazing adventures. So yeah, that is why I couldn't choose between these two. So that was 9 included into one. I'm such a cheat. Number 8 on the list is The Sin Eater's Daughter by Melinda Salisbury. This is a book that I had heard a lot about before I actually read it. I'd seen the cover and thought it was gorgeous. I was really excited to read it. I was actually invited to go to an event by the publishers in London where this was being given out in a goodie bag, but I can never get down to London because it's so expensive, so I wasn't able to go, and I was so devastated. But the wonderful people at Scholastic sent me the book anyway and a little goodie bag, so I got a copy to read and I was really excited. And this is one of those books that lives up to the hype. I'd heard so many people praise it on Twitter, and I was worried that when I read it, it wouldn't be as good as I'd heard people say it was, but it really was. I love the world within this book, and the main character Twyla is such a strong protagonist. She starts off quite innocent, not really knowing much about the world around her, so seeing her finally learn the truth and learn to stand up for herself is brilliant. And I am very excited for the next book in this series, The Sleeping Prince, which is due out next year. So if you haven't given this a read yet, then I would highly recommend it. So number 7 on my list of favourite books from 2015 is George by Alex Gino. This is just such a special book, and I know this one's going to stay with me for a long time. So this is a children/teens book, but it can be read by everyone, and it should be read by everyone. I think it's a very important story about a young transgender girl, and I think it's a great introduction into what it's like for people like George. But it's also a really funny and heartwarming story as well. It's not just one of those books that throws real life issues at you. It's got fantastic characters that will entertain you from beginning to end. So I completely fell in love with George, and that's why it has made my list. Number 6 on my countdown is The Shadow Cabinet by Maureen Johnson. This is the 3rd book in her Shades of London series. I absolutely adore the series, and I don't think it gets enough recognition. I want everyone to be talking about this series because it is so fantastic and underrated. This series has a bit of everything in it. It's got ghosts, it's got action, it's got fantasy, it's got romance. And the romance is very understated. It doesn't throw too much at you, it just gives you the perfect amount. So the cliffhanger from the 2nd book was torturous, meaning that the wait for this one was torturous. So I was so glad to finally be able to read it this year. But once again, it's left me wanting more. Hurry up and write, Maureen, please. So in at number 5 on my list is Binge by Tyler Oakley. I read this one very recently, and I've spoke about it on my channel quite recently as well. Tyler is famous for his YouTube videos, and this is his memoir. This is a look back at some of the moments in his life that have helped define the person that he is today, and it is hilariously entertaining. I could not stop laughing throughout this book, and it's on my list because it was such a pleasant surprise, because there have been so many books released this year by YouTubers. I kind of ended up doubtful about them, thinking are they all going to be the same, but after reading Tyler's, I definitely see why they are so popular. This was just so much fun to read, and I flew through this in a couple of days. I couldn't put it down at all, so that's why it had to be on my list. Coming in at number 4 on my top 10 reads of this year is Royal Wedding by Meg Cabot. This book was the first adult installment in Meg's Princess Diaries series. It was a series that I thought was long over, but I was so excited when Meg announced that she was going to write an adult update, because that is exactly what I wanted. A little catch up as to what my favourite characters from my teen years are doing now. This is about Mia's preparation for her wedding to Michael. It's just such a cute read and so much fun. The characters are just as entertaining as I remember them being from my teens, and the book still has that same magical feel that the Princess Diaries had when I was young. So I was really glad to read about some of my favourite characters again, and I'm so thankful that Meg decided to release this book. So my 3rd favourite book of this year is The Art of Being Normal by Lisa Williamson. Again, this is a book that I think is super important. It's a book that is about transgender characters. It's set in high school, and it sees the problems that they have to face. But again, like George, it's not a problem-telling type of story. It's not a book necessarily about being transgender. It is a story about a character's coming of age in which that character just happens to be transgender. And I'm so glad that we're starting to see more books like this out there, because I just want everyone to be reading books like this. Because stories like this will hopefully help to create a more accepting and understanding generation. It's also really, really entertaining. I found the main characters so hilariously funny. I did cry a few times whilst reading this book, sometimes out of sadness, and then other times out of happiness as well. So this gives you a bit of everything that you want in a story. I fell in love with the characters so much, and I still miss them a little bit. Just holding the book, I miss the characters. So that is why it's made number 3 on my list. So my 2nd favourite book of 2015, and believe me, it was hard to choose between number 1 and 2. Very hard. Just because I loved this book so much, and for a long time I thought it was going to be my favourite book of the year. And that is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I can't even begin to describe how much this overtook my life for the couple of days that I was reading it. I received it in the mail about a week before it was released. And when I get books before the release date, I always like to read them as quick as I can so I can review it on the day that it's published. I mean, I don't have to, I'm not obliged to, but I always like to do that. And when I saw this, I thought, oh my god, how am I going to get through this book in a week? It's huge. And I had so many other books that I was reading at the time as well, so I didn't think I was going to be able to read it. But then, once I started, I could not stop. I ended up reading this book in 2 days. 2 days. I was just crazy about it from the minute I started reading. It is very much a fairy tale for a new generation. It's a new twist on a lot of the old classic fairy tales that we know and love. It is about a dragon that comes down to a town that he protects every 10 years and takes one of the girls away to live with him in his lonely tower, which is the... And at first when I read the synopsis I thought, am I going to like this story? It seems a bit cliche, some nasty guy character taking a young girl to his tower, but oh my god, did I fall in love with this book. I was not ready for the level of feels that this book was going to give me. So for a long time this was my favourite read of 2015. It's only very recently been pushed down to number 2, but I just love this book so much. And I know it already has a movie deal. I think I heard that Ellen DeGeneres is going to be producing the movie adaptation. I can't even begin to describe how excited that makes me. I know it'll probably be a couple of years before anything comes of it anyway, but still, that faint little possibility in the distance, yes. If you haven't read this book, then I would highly recommend it if you love fantasies and fairy tales, because I dare you not to fall in love with this book. Okay, so here we are. My favourite book of 2015. Drum roll, please. I was going to try and do a drum roll myself, but that just didn't happen. Let's just have a fancy sound effect instead. And it is, of course, Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. You probably already know how much I love this book, so it couldn't not be my favourite book of 2015. It consumed my soul. It wasn't just my favourite book of 2015, it is one of my favourite books of all time. It came out of nowhere and just hit me in the feels, and it now has a permanent resting place in my heart. These two characters, Simon and Baz, oh my god. I don't think anything quite compares to this. It's just so unique. Even though it's a book that takes all the cliche tropes of Chosen One stories, it still manages to be completely different to anything that I've read before. And that's all down to how much of a fantastic writer Rainbow Rowell is. This book is just so fantastic and I can't get enough of it. I read this in October, and even now I'm still finding it difficult to start other fiction books because it has left me with such high expectations. I'm trying so hard not to be disappointed by other relationships in books because they're not Simon and Baz. That's why since reading this book I've taken to reading more biographies, simply because I'm just reading about a real person's life. So yeah, nothing else compares to this book this year. As much as I love Uprooted, this just came along and took the top spot in my life. I still can't quite believe that such an extraordinary book exists. So that was it, my top 10 favourite books from 2015. Technically 11. Shh. We can keep it between us, we don't have to tell anyone. I have loved all of those books so much. 2016 is definitely going to have a tough job trying to live up to the level of perfection that 2015 has reached. Carry on. There are quite a few books that I'm really looking forward to in 2016 though. So I am hoping that I'll get some really fantastic reads next year so that I can have a countdown as difficult as this one was. So they have been my favourite books of 2015. What have been yours? What books have you really loved this year? Do you have a favourite? Also, have there been any books that have really disappointed you this year? Maybe a sequel that you didn't think lived up to the first book? Let me know all the end of year book related things in the comments. So thank you for watching my book related videos this past year. I hope you have a fantastic new year, and I hope that 2016 brings you more fabulous books. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!